Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi tahirin. Inshallah, today we want to discuss the duties of the woman, be they individual or social duties. And there are a number of points to mention here. We'll start with the individual duty. With respect to herself, the sister has a duty to learn and act, albeit little, but they have to do it on a constant basis, a permanent basis. Not to learn and act for periods of time and then for other periods do nothing. Even if the learning and acting is minute quantitatively, that's okay, as long as it's done on a permanent basis every day. Ayatollah Khomeini in this regard has said to a group of sisters who were in his presence, I recommend you Muslim and revolutionary women to develop and grant depth to your Islamic faith and ma'rifah to whatever extent feasible, wherever you are, and to add on to your awareness day after day. This will inshallah be a scaffolding for Islam's constant izzah, constant honor of Islam. There are many points here. First, when you have to add on to your awareness day after day, it means every day you have to act and learn. Even if it's little, that's okay. But day after day, you'll get more and more knowledge, more and more action. So even if it's, God forbid, you only have 5 minutes of learning to do, of action to do, keep with those. I mean, the wajibat, that's a separate issue, but outside that, keep it very regular. Be persistent in your actions and your knowledge. And then this, your contribution to society would be that this is a scaffolding for the honor of Islam. Why? Because, as we said in the previous session, women are the educators of humanity. Everyone is born from their laps. So they are the first and most important of educators. And here, the child that you are, before you place your child into society, that woman has many years with this child. Naturally, the more action and knowledge the sister has, the mother has, that child is going to become more and more enhanced in knowledge and action. And this is how, if women were to abide by this individual duty, it does have social positive consequences, because it's a scaffolding for the honor of Islam. Because the children, when they enter society, your children, as a result of your action and knowledge, they're going to participate and contribute maximally. A mother who bears a child and procreates with X amount of knowledge and action, and you are your actions. And when you procreate, these actions will manifest itself onto the child. So a mother with X amount of action and knowledge, if you compare that with a mother with 2x amount of knowledge and action, compare that to a mother with 10x knowledge and action, it's going to be different. You are your actions, and this, when you procreate, that which you're procreating, that which is in your womb for 9 months, it's in unity with you, and you were your actions. So this will have an effect on the child. Now that's inside the womb, then outside for a number of years. In any case, when they say this work of yours would be a scaffolding for the honor of Islam, because by the time you've done a few years with your child, then they enter society, they're going to act as a scaffolding. They're going to succeed if you succeed in this regard. And here, if one abides by this duty, it's as if they are a guarantor of society's salvation. So the first educator, the first teacher is the mother. And especially in the first 7 years, not that we have to teach them through discipline or anything, that's not necessary. If the mother builds herself, as Ayatollah Khomeini said, with action and knowledge, this building of herself would have an educational influence on the child. Not that you have to teach them to memorize things from a very early age. And even if you wanted to do things like that, it has to be through a playing environment in the first 7 years. So these are some issues which one has to consider, and there are many other issues. The more knowledge she acquires on a daily basis, it will have an effect on how to raise the child. In the first 7 years, the second 7 years, the third 7 years, the more aware she is, the more fruitful this raising of the child will be. So in the same way that she would go to a medical clinic and see a midwife on a regular basis, at least in the first 9 months, then they have vaccines at 2 months, 4 months, and so on and so forth. Yes, at the same time, you have to go to a spiritual clinic and learn what to do in these different phases of the child. Okay, now, naturally, when we speak of knowledge and action, there's a hierarchy. And in this hierarchy, we shouldn't expect to be like Her Holiness Lady Fatima alayha salam from day one. No, at least Lady Fatima was a complete protocol. It has a beginning and it has an end. We shouldn't start at the end. Even the beginning, which entails, the basics, we can start there, but grow slowly but surely. When you haven't mastered the earlier steps, it's not very rational then to want to incorporate a trait of Her Holiness in a manner which is on a par with step, let's say 90, but you're still in step 3 or 4. So this hierarchy also has to be borne in mind. And finally, in this individual duty that we're discussing, spirituality is foundational. And what is meant here is that when sisters, for example, gather together, be it in a party or a family gathering or a knowledge-based gathering, spirituality has to be the criterion in these affairs. Even if there's talk of materialism, that materialism has to be a function of spirituality, not materialism in and of itself. It has to be, when you speak of the dunya, it has to be in a way that it's a function of spirituality, at the service of spirituality, not dunya for the sake of dunya. Once they enter, although we're speaking about sisters, but this applies to men too. Once one enters this kind of dunya for the sake of dunya talk, this can have a very paralyzing spiritual effect on the sister, and then that effect will become transferred and conveyed to their children, and so on and so forth. So the gatherings too, they have to be controlled. It has to be, the foundation has to be built on spirituality. It has to be Islamically, an atmosphere of Islam, and it has to be scholar orientated. It shouldn't be left to the sisters or brothers themselves to organize a circle and then say whoever says whatever they want. Although giving your opinions is okay, but not when there's no scholar present. Because if everyone gives their own opinion and there's no one to filter, then your opinion may be wrong. Or people may not even, and if it's right, people may not understand it or take another message out of it. That has to be filtered and organized. So that's what I mean by scholarly orientation. Okay, so that's in relation to the individual duties. Here, Ayatollah Khomeini has said that defending Islam is amongst the wajibat. Then he says, whilst the primary jihad being when you go and attack, you're not defending, you start an attack. Whilst the primary jihad is not obligatory for the woman, but defending is a different story. Defending her boundaries, her sanctuary, her country, her life, her wealth, these are all wajib. He's speaking about women here. Yes, the primary jihad isn't wajib for women, although if they want, they can participate. But when the question of defense of Islam is mentioned, now it may be you're defending your country, life, wealth, family, honor, and so on and so forth, these are all wajib. Then he says, if such is the case, the preliminaries to defending too become wajib, such as military training, to that degree which is possible or feasible. It's not as if it's been made wajib for us to defend, but we remain ignorant as to how to defend. So look, the primary jihad, it's not wajib. But the jihad which is defensive, it's wajib. For the woman too. In all fields, even militarily, it becomes wajib. Now, when something is wajib, the preliminaries, learning, preparing yourself for the preliminaries, that too becomes wajib. So you can't just say that's wajib, but you never prepare yourself during your life for such a thing. Then he ends by saying, note, the environment for such preliminaries must be such that the chastity of the woman be preserved in all domains. And that goes back to yesterday's talk too, when we said those attributes of perfection which constitute the identity of the woman, yes, that's the criterion. So even if you want to prepare yourself as a woman for defense on a military level, and you prepare yourself in training, it has to be done in an environment where those attributes of Allah, which constitute your identity, they shouldn't be compromised. Okay, so this shows how important. Now, it's not only, defense isn't only militarily, it may be defending, for example, the religion of Islam. There may be many dilemmas are raised, many attacks are made. You have to defend such things. Sometimes a woman may come and attack Islam. You have to defend it. There's more responsibility compared to that of a man. Now you want to prepare yourself to defend an attack a woman has made somewhere in the world against Islam, the religion. You have to go front. You are the first in line before a male comes. And then you have to prepare yourself for this kind of defense. Now this defense is knowledge-based. So this means you have to learn. Yes. If you don't learn and just come out and for the love of Islam you just want to defend when you're not equipped properly, you'll do more damage like that. Then someone has to come and clear your mess, and so on and so forth. So you just look, when half of society are women, the potential is a lot here. The human resources, It's a lot of potential here that can be used. And not using it, look at the waste that follows. If you really think about it, the waste is enormous. And are we allowed to turn a blind eye to such a mighty potential which is there, but no one's doing anything about it? Here, in relation to knowledge, sometimes in some cultures they don't send their daughters, for example, to learn. And Ayatollah Khomeini here has said that he wants to recommend that you should always never act as a hindrance to your daughter learning knowledge and action. Okay, there may be exceptional cases, but I don't know of any, but we'll leave that open. But in general, the quest of knowledge and action, whatever applies to men, applies to women too. Whatever applies to boys, applies to girls too. We shouldn't hinder them. Yes, sometimes it may be a bit more difficult for a girl to grow in a particular environment or school. Here, that just means the parents have to do more effort. It doesn't mean that she should not go. Ayatollah Khomeini has said, a mother and father must never, out of religious zeal, think that they should prevent their daughters from higher education. Religion has said no such thing. In relation to the acquisition of knowledge, religion has paid no preference between boys and girls. And there are ahadith which he's extrapolated such a sentence, that it's mandatory for Muslims and Muslimas. So here, this too ties in with what we said earlier. If one does this, this will be a scaffolding for the honor of Islam. Now, but is that enough though? Imagine now a sister with a very high status of expertise, of knowledge in whatever field, but let's say her human essence, her soul, her spirit, that hasn't flourished. Actually, it's remained static. She's paid no attentiveness to her inside. But in relation to a given science, she has succeeded. She's grasped a very good control of a given science, but neglected her spiritual dimension. What value would such knowledge have? Ayatollah Khomeini says. The value is very limited. Because that knowledge that you gained was supposed to be hand in hand. It should work hand in hand with your spirituality. Once the spirituality is neglected, that knowledge now is a veil. It's a major veil for you. Your contribution to society now will be just like how a specialist or expert who is a kafir, how they can contribute to society. You've just reached, on a par with that level. The value is very limited. So that spirituality, that has to be always regarded as one's goal and the criterion to one's efforts. Now, coming on to the woman's social role, here it's not an art, it's not an honor for a woman to emulate a man. There's no art in that. And why does the media want to portray this as a value? That, a woman, they can do the same functions as a man. The media keep on, in their films, in their advertisements, in their other forms of media, they want to put this forward, that the woman does everything that the man does too. They never go the other way around, that the man does everything that the woman can do. They don't enter that avenue. They're both wrong, both avenues are wrong. But look how strong a media which has no spirituality, the world media, which has no spirituality, this is what it concludes. This is a natural conclusion from a media that is spiritual-less. You wouldn't expect anything else. Whereas we believe the identity of the man, the identity of the woman, they have particular identities, they're different. It's all based on the attributes of perfection, the attributes of Allah, and how they manifest it. Well, when you are spirituality less, you won't even think of these kind of things. The more you're drowned in the absence of spirituality, it's only natural you come with such a conclusion that the woman does everything that a man does. Why not? So they want to make a man out of a woman. So even the likes of Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of England many years ago, and even many Eastern countries like one was Bangladesh, Myanmar or Burma, one or two countries like that, they have a woman Prime Minister. Now here, no one is against women Prime Ministers. It's possible, it's permissible, okay? But as long as she's preserving her woman identity, that would be of value. But someone like Margaret Thatcher was like four men put together. That identity of her womanhood was absent. She was more a man than many other men. That's not a value for women, being like a man. But as I want to emphasize, it's permissible to be a prime minister. It's permissible to be a president, okay? But you're a woman prime minister. The batini woman has to be preserved. So this idea that some women say that why can't a woman do whatever a man does, and this belittles us women when you say we can't do whatever a man. This is an identity crisis. Now Islam has given us our identity. For men, a particular identity, for women. And these two identities have to pair with one another, complement one another. That law of pairing we discussed yesterday. And the woman has to ask herself, why are women persuaded to be a copy of a man? What's the agenda behind this? So, no one is denying women's role in society, and no one is saying that they shouldn't participate in community work, in all social domains. No one is saying that. That's open for women and men. And there is some commonality. There are some duties of society which apply to both men and women. The example of defense, for example, we gave. But there are areas which are specific to men, and not that it's haram for women, but it may be burdensome for them. And there are areas which are specific for women, not that it's haram for men, but they may not be innately, constitutionally ready to do such a thing. It's not on a par with their constitution. So rather, these two have to complement one another in society, and they have to work hand in hand. Now this working hand in hand, this is an Islamic tenet. The scholars have extracted this from the Quran, that men and women in society, they have to work together. Now you may say that we're very far behind. Yes, you're right. Look at, for example, in Iran, which is the best model we have today for an Islamic society, even though it may be 20% successful or 30% Islamic, there's still a long way to go. After 2,500 years of monarchy, you can't expect the country all to change in a generation or two. It takes time. But it's the best we have today. And here, so we want to see some examples where women work hand in hand with men in all fields of the social domain, be it in the television sector, cinema, be it in politics, be it in other things. And yes, for example, in the world of cinematography, it's different to how Hollywood works. And the women, let's say, are prepared by women. The men are prepared by men. You see, these basic halal and harams are observed to some degree. As I say though, there's a long way yet to go, even in Iran, but it's getting better bit by bit. But in the medics, for example, the doctors, here after the revolution you see certain specialities like pediatrics, obstetrics and gynecology. The women suddenly, they entered and they're predominating those fields, they're dominating those fields. But one area which they've succeeded a lot in Iran, where brothers and sisters work together, are in the Basiji and Sepah forces, the volunteering forces, where the Sepah gives them a budget to a group of very religious people who really want to give their time to go to impoverished places and start building wells, buildings, housing, and all the basic with the budget they're given. But it's self-rule between the brothers and sisters. And they have produced a lot. It's a kind of jihadi groups they have. And even when Corona started 2.5 years ago, from this group, this sector of society, if it wasn't for them, the nurses would have struggled a lot. They came in their thousands. So here they come together, they work sometimes, hand in hand, they go, and when there are earthquakes, they suddenly send their forces. They call it the mobilization forces. They're very mobile. Whoever needs them, they go there. And whenever no one needs them, they go to the impoverished places where there is need, and they start building housing and equipping them. If they're doctors, they provide medical expertise. Whoever has any form of expertise, they convey that expertise to those local areas. Now, but this concept of working hand in hand, and we're far off from it, because usually in a given field you see men are dominating. But this working hand in hand, this is extrapolated from this verse in the Holy Quran, chapter 7, verse 81. Now look, it's a universal principle, this. Now, this principle now though is in a particular narrative, a particular historical incident, but outside that particular narrative, the principle holds for any scenario. It's the story of Lut and what the men were doing in the time of Lut alayhi salam. إنكم لتأتون الرجال شهوة من دون النساء. You're approaching men. Speaking to the men. You're approaching the men. Shahwa wise. Min dun nisa, without women. Not women. Now shahwa is an inclination. In this context, the inclination is a sexual inclination towards other men. Okay? But shahwa, that's in that context. The meaning though is an inclination. It's not limited to a sexual inclination. It can be any inclination. In this context, it was of this type. But you have an inclination towards knowledge. You have an inclination towards wealth, power, and many other things. Your inclinations aren't just limited to that one. That one was for that particular story once upon a time. But this is a general principle for the whole of time. Wherever there's an inclination, and we have a fitrah, our fitrah makes us inclined towards knowledge, power, education, all other things. It's not only one thing. So the principle is this: whenever you are approaching the same sex in relation to a particular inclination, the Quran is saying, why? Why are you doing it without women? You have to do it together, whatever the inclination is. You shouldn't do it only men or only women. Okay? And if you do that, the verse continues, بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ مُسْرِفُونَ. You are a people who are committing israf. You're transgressing. You're living, you're wasting your potential. You're a waster. You do israf. So here, remember that point where half of society are women. And these women have a potential. And then in any given social domain, if it's dominated by men, that potential is wasted. Look, it's a Quranic tenet. Ayatollah Khomeini has said in one of his speeches to women, he said, as I have said before, the responsibility of being present in society and understanding the general difficulties and pains of one's society and endeavoring in curing these difficulties and pains, this is not specific to men or women. Women cannot free and remove themselves from such responsibilities. If women must execute a given work in such a domain, they must do so. There's no limit. This comes with that defense we spoke earlier. But those specific responsibilities, i.e. those functions which Allah has assigned for women on a par with their nature, that's also important. And this, therefore, this is a very alien notion for many Muslims. This, after 2,500 years of monarchy, where God knows how they treated women for 2,500 years in Iran. You can't expect suddenly, just because we have a pure leader who came and convinced the people that this is the way, you can't expect the people all, suddenly for them to change their state of thinking. So this Quranic notion is something which seems very alien. And as I say, in Iran, we may be 20 or 30% there. There's still room. But it's the best we have. We can learn from them. And so here too, women have a duty to correct. In addition to all the other duties they have, women have this duty to correct the minds of people, Muslims or non-Muslims, Muslims within or even people outside. Women have this duty to convey and correct society's perceptions of women according to Islam. This is a duty of the woman. A man can't do that. So this perception, especially that which the West wants to keep on put forward, and they want to portray the ideal woman in that light, here the women have to come and change this perception. And they do that theoretically sometimes, through knowledge and debates, but the best is through action. And here Iran has shown that action, when suddenly in many specialities in the medical field, engineering, schooling, higher education, all these, the women have come in their thousands and hundreds of thousands, and have even overtook men in many areas. So this perception too, you women and you sisters, you can't stay silent. When you see the wrong perception of women is being portrayed, if you stay silent in the face of all these wrong perceptions which are propagated day in, day out, it's as if you're endorsing it. And you will be held accountable. You can't just sit in and be comfortable with it. God forbid, even worse than this would be, God forbid if someone goes, a Muslim, and propagates that Western notion of a woman. And it's not only about hijab. Hijab is just one aspect of a woman. It's a very important aspect, but it's only one aspect. And then someone doesn't want to wear the hijab for whatever reason, and then they go and propagate anti-hijabi values. See, such an action is on a par with a secular ideology. This man or the brother or sister who does such a thing, they will be resurrected in the hereafter with those people. Okay, it's a partial resurrection. They're still Muslim, but they're partially resurrecting themselves as non-Muslims of a given type. Okay, so inshallah tomorrow then we've gone through many social duties in general principle. Now a bit more about motherhood inshallah and the family unit. What are the duties there and how do they count in contrast to these? Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala tahirin. If there are any questions, yes. Yes. Assalamu alaikum.
I understood what you explained in regards to the exposure to the best academic environment for our daughters. Sometimes in our context locally, that environment is constructing certain values that are associated with Western ideologies. And although we parents, yes, have a role, as you explained, sometimes really the amount of hours the child is spending immersed in that environment and its other characteristics, so they require the girls to participate in sport or in mixed classes or for example, and to some degree we have control, but to some degree it's limited. Is there a point where we may have to remove the child from that environment if it impedes on the wajib or sharia responsibility of, for example, hijab and interacting with the opposite gender as she grows?
Yes, so the red lines are when haram is done. That's the red line. Now, mere interaction doesn't necessarily mean haram automatically. But there are different forms of interaction which do qualify as haram. But for you, the red line is haram. Here, in relation to the earlier point though, that you go to a school and it's a good school, but certain Western values may be inculcated in them. Okay, now that's a problem. I'm not saying it's haram per se, but it can be a serious problem with long-lasting effects. Here the criterion would be, and you answered it in your question, that if the parents are in control of the situation and they have the equipment to counteract, there's no problem. If they are, no, they don't. Now, for whatever reason, they may be illiterate or have no access to social media, and so these new concepts which arise or these values, they have no idea what they are. They just have money, for example, and then they send their schools in the best schools. Yes, this would be irresponsible because there's no one to control those two. But it doesn't mean they can think of something else. Give money for private tuition for them. They can go to that school, but let a scholar give tuition to these children to counteract, because they certainly can't. So the parents, is their responsibility. Sometimes they're in control, they're dominating the scenario very well, that's okay. Sometimes it's a no-go area, that would be irresponsible unless they compensate in another way. But sometimes they're doing their best, they're in control mostly, but sometimes they may fail. That we don't need to decide yet whether we should take them out of the school or let them stay, give them a chance, let's see how it goes, because at the end of the day they're learning skills which they may not be learning elsewhere, and it hasn't reached a critical point yet. It's just that the parents are failing in one or two areas, but overall they're in charge. But haram is something that from day one, you should never even be hesitant about. I.e., if, for example, they have to unclothe for a given sport, and they say this is mandatory, you shouldn't even think of that school. Don't even go there. This is, satanic temptations here, that you say, well, maybe we can do something, and that maybe, when you want to live off maybes and always put your daughter on the brink of, exceptions, living an exception at school, that spirit of, well, I can wear my hijab like this or like that, or always the very bare minimum, that will itself be negative. Yes.
So there's one hadith which I heard,
Yes.
not hadith, sorry, says that a woman can excel at any job or career or subject that she wants,
Yes.
as long as she is a qadbanu. I don't know what this word means. Qadbanu?
Oh, Katbanu,
Yeah.
right, yes. Yes, it's like the master of the house.
Oh, I see.
Yes. So, now I don't know, maybe a scholar said this, or
I heard it was from Rahman, but I don't know.
from Rahbar. Yes. Yes, so I think in that, yes, the context would be something like this, that everything in the house is under control. Everything is in its place. She's a master of the house, and she's successfully mastering everything. Everything is in shape. Everything is happening when it should be happening, how it should be happening. And when she goes to work, it won't compromise the family unit. And we'll speak more about that from the Rahbar tomorrow, inshallah. Yes, yes.
If a mother or a woman daughter sees herself somewhat displaying certain characteristics that she feels in disciplining, for example, the environment of her children are too masculine in nature, like controlling or communicating with her children in a way that's more generally harsh than what's associated with a female. She sees this as becoming habitual in herself so that she can control the environment. Should she remedy this, rein in this authority, for example, or authoritative attitude that she has with her children in order to better manifest more feminine attributes?
Yes. So that is a definite yes. It's a definite yes, because this is doing harm to the child. But the question is how? The reason I say a definite yes, because even in breastfeeding, the mother, according to ahadith that we have, is conveying her dispositional traits to the child. And the likes of Ibn Sina, on seeing such ahadith, has said that if the mother's a coward, if the mother is always sad or depressed, if she's of an angry temperament, give the child for others to breastfeed. Look, that the logic behind such a statement by Ibn Sina applies with your question too. And here, sometimes a mother knows that I'm going to lose my control in this particular thing, but they may have maids. If they don't have maids, she may have a sister. She may have other aides which can do it. But if she refrains from it, she would be doing less damage. Yes. Because children, their best friends to start off with is the parents. It's only when things go wrong with one of them, then they start looking outside for friends. And the stronger this bond is, even when they go and find friends in society, they will always share with their parents because they were their first friends, first comrades. They'll come and say, this person said this person said this. But if they feel, because of an angry mother who was constantly angry, that I can't, confide in her now. So she goes and she speaks with other friends in school and everything, and she doesn't come back to this mother because of a particular disposition she may have, and then it's a downward spiral of yes. Okay, so inshallah tomorrow. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala tahirin.